everybody. This is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to continue the ongoing series, Liturgical Abuses That Drive Me Crazy, and posit the question, why do so many modern and suburban Catholic churches need to look so ugly? Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filii et Spiritui Sancto, sicut erat in principio et nunc et semper et saecula saeculorum. Amen. Saint Michael the Archangel, pray for us. All right, so I'll put a banner for the ongoing series. I think we have 5 or 6 episodes where we talk about some pet peeves that I have in the typical, as Father McTeague from the Catholic Current says, Our Lady of Suburbia parishes. I created an Instagram about 4 months ago called Catholic_or_Protestant. I'll put a link or in the episode notes, where I show a church a day, and you have to guess whether or not it's a Catholic church or a mainline Protestant church. And I intentionally will pick churches that are confusing. I mean, clearly I'm not going to put in St. Peter's or a church that has traditional basilican form with a transept and the apse and a sanctuary with a crucifix and the tabernacle behind it. You know, clearly that's going to be Catholic. But I pick like Our Lady of Suburbia parishes. Like I have a church that has Jesus coming out of the brick, and there's an altar, but there's no tabernacle. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with mainline Protestant groups like Lutheranism, Anglicanism, Episcopalian/Anglican, a lot of their churches look like ours. You'd be shocked. Like if your whole life you've only gone to Catholic parishes, whether it be Novus Ordo or TLM, you go to one of these churches, you'd be like, wow, this looks very Catholic. They have an altar. They might have a cross at least, and look, they might have a cross, but you can go to a Catholic church that doesn't even have a crucifix. They might have a cross. They might not even have either. They could have resurrected Jesus. You know, you're running the gamut on what you're going to find in Catholic churches today, and you'd be shocked. Like a lot of the most hideously ugly Catholic churches are coming out of Europe. We're so kind of Americocentric, but there's some ugly ones, all in the name of abstract modern art, that have been designed over in Europe and also in Latin America as well, that are just, God, they make our ugliest Catholic churches look sublime. And look, I'm not really going to offer like any like tips here. I would say, like, and I've mentioned this book, Ugly as Sin by Michael Rose. He also wrote a great book called Goodbye, Good Men, which talked about how the seminaries in the 80s and 90s were pushing out Orthodox heterosexual men because they were already run by the Crimson Mafia, by the homosexual mafia in the seminary. And so they didn't want, legitimate men with vocations to enter the seminary. But he also wrote a book called Ugly as Sin, where he talks about post-Vatican II, how a lot of Catholic dioceses, in the name of ecumenism, hired Protestant architects to design the churches. And of course, you can see this laid out, where a lot of Catholic churches in the church and in the sanctuary near the altar don't demonstrate a lot of Catholicism. And I like to think, like with the seminaries being cleaned out to a certain extent nowadays, and there's more Orthodox seminaries, I'd like to think that the newer churches coming out today are going to be more traditional. And understand, the basilican form of Catholic architecture goes back to ancient Rome. The basilica, you can go to Rome, for example, and still see the ruins of the basilica. The basilicas were used for trading, they were markets and so forth. And so when Constantine legalized the Catholic Church, he didn't create it, go to that episode, we were able to go into these public buildings and use it. And so the basilica form, which is essentially the long form, existed in different iterations, whether it be like Romanesque in the 12th century or High Gothic a century later, Baroque later on. That was the norm in the West. Now in the East, you had more of the octagonal form, and you had a little variations in architecture. But that was kind of the norm until really, Vatican II, and then the spirit of Vatican II came in, and then you saw these modern churches being built. And so I like to think that in the typical diocesan parishes being built, that we're returning more to this traditional form, because understanding why did we have these beautiful Romanesque High Gothic churches that were built, took hundreds of years to build these churches, where multiple generations of Masons from these small towns, not the Freemasons, where Masons would build these towns for the greater glory of God, right? For their posterity. And you can still go to these towns. They're like small little French villages like Beauty and the Beast, and then you see this towering cathedral, because when you walk in, right, it's sublime, it's transcendent, it lends you to worship and prayer. If any of you gone to the great cathedrals in Europe or in Latin America, you will feel this. And then you go to Our Lady of Suburbia Parish, which many times, I mean, will have the banners behind the altar, won't have the tabernacle. They put the tabernacle in a closet, might have brick Jesus, might have resurrected Jesus, and looks more Protestant than Catholic. And that doesn't lend itself to prayer. The holy sacrifice of the Mass is the highest form of worship that we have. And so as such, we talk about that in the episode, why a large majority of Catholics don't believe in the real presence, is when you go to a typical suburban parish and go to their Mass, there's nothing transcendent that's going on. People are dressed in t-shirts and shorts or slacks. You have extraordinary ministers that are dressed the same way. The music is popish. The architecture is not lending to it. So all these kind of contribute to the like if this was the real presence, we'd take it seriously. Whereas if you went back in time 500 years to say I don't know, Pius V's time, it was different. You know, the architecture was there and people would dress up and it was a serious thing. But either way, I lament the fact that so many of our churches have gone this way. And look, they're not all like that. Certainly in the traditional community, you see like the SSPX, for example, is building a basilica and somewhere in the Great Plains. And of course, they're going to build a very traditional looking church. And I just wish that, you know, and I don't want to go the mad trad view of like, of course, the church is an apostasy. They're not going to build anything that looks Catholic because the church has been. I'm not going to go down that road. I just wish that the bishops and the archbishops in these different dioceses would realize what's working, what's not working. We have an episode. It's like, please, can the modernist pastor go visit a TLM parish to see what's working? Because if you go to the typical parish, it's empty. It's mostly 70-year-old octogenarians, septuagenarians, not a lot of young families. The worship is lackluster. Then you go to the TLM, where it's just overflowing. It's the same thing here. I wish these bishops, in all charity, and I want to believe that they're earnest and just misguided, would go and look like, just be honest, be like, God, these churches that we build are so ugly. We need to oscillate back and start building, looking back at posterity, kind of like the Latin Mass, looking back at our patrimony and be like, these church designs worked forever. How about this? Shocking. Let's go back to them. Let's go back to it. This little experiment we've had for 50 years. It's not working on so many levels. Let's go back to tradition. Guys, post in the comments. I'd like to hear from you. Let me know if your parish or the one you grew up with was very modern in its look, in its architecture, and in its outlook. Love to hear from you. Hit the notification, subscribe, and share button, and share with others. Until next time, take care. God bless and pray.